R3S3 Loud Voices. First, let's read the problem statement. A simple cone-shaped or horn-shaped object can be used to optimize the transfer of the human voice to a remote listener. Investigate how the resulting acoustic output depends on relevant parameters such as the shape, size, and material of the cone. Okay, so at first, let's look at what's the human voice. We plot a spectrogram of the human voice, and you can see that mostly lower frequencies are in the human voice. We apply
the right taste of cheese improves with age.
This is the sentence we said. It's a Harvard sentence used to measure transmission lines and their efficiency. Doesn't matter. We apply high and low pass filters and ended up on a frequency range that was good enough that we could still clearly hear the full sentence and understand the meaning of the words said. Therefore, we stated the frequency of the human voice would be between 440 Hz to 3000 Hz. Okay, now let's get to the phenomenon. These are polar graphs of sound intensity over around a speaker. You can see that when no horn is attached, the overall sound intensity is quite low. And when a horn is attached, sound intensity is a lot bigger in decibels, SPL. Okay, so now let's look at the basic principle behind this phenomenon. Basic principle behind this phenomenon is impedance matching. But to know what impedance matching is and how it works, we need to first understand what impedance is. Acoustic impedance is the opposite of the system to acoustic flow when pressure is applied. It has a close analogy of electrical impedance, which is commonly known, and the real part of the electrical impedance can be calculated as voltage divided by current. An analogy between electrical and acoustic impedance can be made as such that the voltage is close to acoustic pressure and the current to acoustic flow. Therefore, we can state that the acoustic impedance would be acoustic pressure divided by acoustic flow. Okay, so now let's look at impedance matching in electrical circuits. To optimize the circuit for highest power, we want to make sure that the impedance of the source is the same as the impedance of the load. At this point, the highest power is the highest power transmission is able to occur, and lowest reflection occurs in the circuit. Okay, so for our acoustic problem, when we look at a driver without a horn, it has a moving membrane with a relatively high impedance, pushing air with low impedance. This system is badly impedance matched since the impedance aren't close enough to each other. Therefore, low power transfer occurs and energy dissipates from the speaker. But when we add a horn, the horn produces a load on the driver, making a higher impedance between the driver and the horn. Between the horn and the driver, and thus matching the horn, the impedance is better, resulting in a more efficient power transfer. Okay, so now this is the phenomenon behind making the sound louder, but also the phenomenon behind this is making the sound more directed. When using a point sound, the point source, the intensity can be calculated as such, and it goes to all of the direction nearly similarly. But when adding a horn, we can assume that the wavefront area decreases. Therefore, the intensity drop off over distance is also lower. Okay, so now let's look at the sound distribution of different setups. I'll present you our apparatus for this measurement. We use a loudspeaker connected to a piezoelectric sound loudspeaker connected to a rotating platform, which has a microphone in front of it. We were measuring the acoustic intensity while rotating the platform. The sound was at 3000 Hz exactly, and from that we could find the acoustic intensity over the angle of the horn. Okay, so now let's look at our measurements. First, we measured the dependencies for tone angles. First, we used a cylinder type horn. Therefore, we said that this is a horn of zero angle. And you can see that the acoustic output is relatively small compared to what happens when you add a cone of an angle of 30 degrees. You can see sort of interference at the back, and this only amplifies when we add a even wider horn of 100 degrees, where the interference at the back and front is so high that the overall acoustic output is smaller than at the lower angles. Okay, so we plotted a graph of the acoustic gain doing no cone setup for different angles of horns. We can see that there is a certain optimum between a cylinder and a very wide angle of the horn. Okay, now let's look at the impact of cone length on the overall acoustic output. You can see a acoustic spectrogram, polar plot of acoustic intensity over angle of the horn with no cone. By adding a small cone of only 3 centimeters long, we can see that the overall acoustic output increases greatly, and this, by adding an even higher horn, we can see that the acoustic intensity at the front is higher and higher, but there's not such a different height, and it just gets higher. So, we plotted a graph of a dependency of cone length and intensity over distance. We can see that longer horns have a better, have higher intensities at the same distance. Therefore, we assume that a longer horn is better. To cone material, we compare different materials, paper and plastic horns. A paper horn, has its acoustic intensity as such, but by adding a plastic horn, we're able to see much higher intensities. This is due to the fact that by using a plastic, which is a steeper material, the energy transfer is a lot more efficient. Okay, now that we have polar plots of the intensity over angle, we can use this to calculate acoustic power. We assume that a small change in distance can be calculated as a spherical sector for the surface around the speaker. Therefore, we could calculate the intensity of the sound. We did this and plotted a graph of relative acoustic power to a no horn setup, where we can see that a cone with a plastic cone has the highest acoustic output relevant to a no cone setup. Okay. Yes. Okay. We can also see that the cylinder, as on the bottom right, has a even lower acoustic output than a no horn setup. This is due to the fact that the cylinder acts as pure resistance to the sound and does not, in fact, impedance match the horn, the sound with the speaker. Okay, now we'll be looking at optimizing the horn shape. For this, we'll be solving the Webster horn equation, which has the cross-sectional area in it, and it depends on the development of cross-sectional area over distance and the wave number of the sound. Therefore, it will be frequency dependent, and also the velocity potential of the sound. Okay, we'll be assuming an infinite exponential horn, for which the Webster horn equation can be solved as such, where we get the impedance of the horn is this horn, and we want to minimalize the we want to minimize the imaginary. We want to minimize the imaginary part of the resistance. Therefore, we'll be optimizing our horn for the cutoff frequency, and this will in fact ensure that we have the highest frequency. That the cutoff frequency would be the frequency at which the intensity would be the highest. Okay? So for solving this, for doing as such, we'll express the frequency for which we want to optimize. So at the beginning we said a range, but for this we need one optimal frequency. This will be 440 Hz, and therefore we can get the slope from the equation on the surface of the cross section of the horn. Therefore, we can design our horn, 3D print it, and measure the frequency response. We measured our frequency response by attaching a speaker and pointing a microphone in front of it. We created frequency sweeps that change the frequency over time, from which we could extrapolate the amplitude of different frequencies. As such, this is a frequency response of a low horn setup. We can see that this speaker is fairly optimized for human voice, which is highlighted in the green area. By adding a horn, which we optimized before, we can see that the overall intensity over different frequencies rises, and we plot a graph of acoustic gain to a no horn setup. We can see that the highest gain appears around our frequency of 440 Hz. Therefore, we created a optimized horn. So, to sum up, relevant parameters of the horn would be the length, the angle, the width of the end of the horn, the shape of the horn, and the material. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your report. Clarifying questions from the opponent, please.
Okay, for order. How do you account for background noise?
Well, we keep them only some frequency, therefore we did not really have to account for background noise since background noise is mainly lower frequencies.
Did you record background noise?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good. And which sound did you play in your horn?
In our horn, well, it depends on the angle dependencies which we made. We had one frequency, and for the frequency sweeps we did all.
Okay, and did you check that the frequency you tried to play corresponded to your actual frequency played?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and what was your microphone sensitivity?
Like frequency response of the microphone. Shall I show you the correct frequency response curve of the microphone? We did not measure it, but it was as such. So for lower frequencies, it created a lower gain, but this was out of the scope of our frequencies that we were interested in.
Okay, and how far away was the sound source from the horn?
2 wavelengths of the sound.
2 wavelengths of the
Yes.
sound. Okay, and did you in any way collect the sound that was played into the horn?
Collect this
Yes.
sound. We recorded it.
Yes, but when you played the sound
Yes.
into a horn, did you collect it anyway on one side?
I'm not really sure how you mean collect.
Okay, thank you. And did you do any repeats of your experiments? So for the same set of parameters, did you do any repeats?
Yes, for the dependencies from distance we did.
So not for angle or length?
No, I mean the dependencies of the development of intensity over time, and this was done also for the angle and length.
And when you repeated the measurements, did you build new horns?
No.
No. Okay.
No, okay, yeah,
Thank you.
that's it. Thank you for your questions.
Loud voices. So at your presentation summary, they defined human voice spectrum, which was good since the task explicitly mentions how human voices are amplified in horns. They also introduced roller plots and directivity, which is good since directivity is an important aspect of how horns function. They also implement acoustic impedance matching, which is another aspect of why horns amplify sound. And they also present the Webster horn equation and how it can be applied to exponential horns. So where's the experiment? They had a rotating setup that could measure intensity from different angles. They varied the angle of their contact horn as well as the length, and they optimized the horn shape. And they investigated both conical and exponential horns. And their conclusion was that the larger angle is better directivity and the same as for a longer horn. They also vary the material. However, their explanations for why the material gives better directivity was not properly explained, and it was not properly connected to the theory surrounding acoustic impedance matching. They also modeled an exponential horn using the Voice-to-Horn equation, which we will get into more later. They did not have any true and predictive theory. They did not compare experiments explicitly with to theory. So they looked at both, they talked about both acoustic impedance matching and directivity, both which are important aspects of wide horns amplified sound. They vary the angle and the length, and the material, of course, all of which are in the problem statement. And they investigated several different types of horns. However, as I said, the explanation of why materials give rise to difference in directivity was unclear, and I think this could have been much better motivated and connected to the theory of horns. They also had a short distance from the recorder to the floor, which is problematic since when you play a sound, you can get some reverberations from the ground that might affect the noise. Also, when they did repeats for different horn designs, they did not make new horns, meaning that they had systematic errors in the length and angle of the horns. What they should have done is to build new horns for every repetition so as to account for this. And when they played the sound into the microphone, they did not in any way collect it. So for example, if you have a structure that hinders the sound being played directly from the microphone from passing around it and then being recorded on the other end, thus affecting the recorded sound. One of the greatest flaws of this report was that they did not discuss standing waves and resonance phenomena, both of which are central aspects to a finite horn, and which we'll get into more later. They also used the Voice-to-Horn equation to model an exponential horn, even though an exponential horn is not a 1p horn, meaning that it can, in fact, not be correctly applied to it. A 1p horn, we'll get into that. And they did not, although they had a good explanation of acoustic impedance matching, they did not connect their results to acoustic impedance matching, and they did not explain why a smaller difference in acoustic impedance actually results in more efficient energy transfer. And also, we think it would have been beneficial to play white noise in order to better discern which frequencies are amplified. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Conan. And now we move on to the discussion.
Okay, so first up, you talked about you talked about acoustic impedance matching. You talked about acoustic impedance matching. Okay, so here we have a horn.
Yes.
And we have a source with a high impedance. We have a medium, low, and this one's middle. Why is energy transfer more efficient when you have this horn?
Okay, so if we name this impedance Z1, okay, the impedance that's the air, Z2, we want a geometrical series for the impedances to occur. Therefore, the impedance of this should be Z1, Z2 squared. Therefore, the development of the strong of the horn should be exponential, thus adding the exponential curve.
Okay, I think the most important, I don't really think this clearly answers the question of why you get more efficient energy transfer. I would say that the most important part here is that whenever you have a large difference in acoustic impedance with two mediums, you get reflections.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
This optimizes the transfer and minimizes the reflection.
Exactly. So by adding some middle impedance, you get some reflections here and some here,
yes,
but they are smaller than if you remove the horn. Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so
how do you think this connects to your results?
Well, Webster horn equation accounts for the impedance of the whole horn. Therefore, by minimizing the imaginary part, which represents the reflection, we get the highest view part, which would be the low link driver, therefore transmission.
Okay, so for example, when you change materials,
Yeah.
did you affect this?
Okay, that does not necessarily affect the impedance of the horn. It changes the energy losses to the horn itself of the acoustic wavefront.
Okay, and then on the matter of reflections,
Yes.
when you, for example, widen the horn,
Yes. Okay.
what changes with the reflections?
Well, okay, so.
So because you saw a difference in the, you saw a difference in their activity
Yeah, okay.
in different
Okay,
dimensions.
so acoustic in impedance is depends on the surface area of the wavefront of the okay. Once again, by changing the angle, you change the development of impedance over the distance. Therefore, it changes the transmission of the sound because the changes in impedance are
Okay,
different.
so let me clarify this.
Yes.
If you have a cylinder
Yes,
and you play sound through this,
yes,
if you looked at the frequency spectrum,
yes.
so intensity against frequency, how would this differ from when you played it through one of the boards?
Okay, so in such setup, standing waves, as you said, may occur, and this will change the intensity of different frequencies, picking up some frequencies, lowering down some frequencies. This was not necessarily what we intended to do, since cylindrical horns only create resistance for the acoustic output, not really amplifying it.
Okay, so I would contend here that just talking about acoustic impedance is not sufficient to fully understand the phenomenon. Because one of the points here is that a cylinder has very specific resonant frequencies, whereas when you widen the board, two things happen.
Yeah.
First, here you have a problem with smaller frequencies, meaning larger wavelengths, having trouble fitting through the board.
Yeah.
Whereas when you widen it, the smaller frequencies can fit through it. A second thing happens, which is that when you widen the board, you also broaden the frequency spectrum. So for a cylinder, you would have very specific resonance frequencies. Whereas if you looked at the one for horn, you would widen this.
I don't think it's really easy to express the resonant frequency for a cylinder, since the theory behind it is really.
Yeah. My point was simply
Yeah.
to compare with this example, not that this would be an effective horn.
Oh, okay,
Play with it.
Yeah, okay,
The
I
idea.
agree that would have different frequencies.
Yes.
On.
Okay, so you model an exponential, an infinite horn.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the important point here is that an infinite horn will be fundamentally different from a finite horn, since in an infinite horn,
Yeah, okay.
reflections of the mouth doesn't happen. But
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to summarize that we discussed reflections within a horn, and I would contend that this is an important part of the phenomenon that should have been clearly incorporated in the presentation. I also think that it would have been beneficial to create plots showing intensity of different frequencies, so as to more clearly see how these vary for different angles and lengths.
I'd like to
So,
argue that plots of different
Sorry, I would like
intensities
to
of different
move on.
frequencies
I would like to move
okay,
on.
we can move
Yes.
on.
Okay, so can you please clarify a bit how the sound is played into the board?
Well,
So how
there were two setups we had.
Yes.
One was a piezoelectric sound generator which has a small moving membrane.
Yes.
A horn was attached to the membrane, and then
So it was attached directly to the membrane.
no,
No.
like the membrane is the housing. The membrane
Yes.
is here moving. And the
Yes.
horn was attached as such.
Okay. And in your second setup?
In a second setup, we had a speaker, not piezoelectric, but normal magnetic with a coil, and the membrane was moving as such. That's in the piezoelectric sound generator, and the horn was attached as such.
Okay, so I'm glad that we clarified this, because one of the problems that you could have had if you had placed it, for example, at some distance, is that some parts of the sound
Yeah, sure,
may have
sure.
traveled like
This
that.
was obvious.
So I think this part of the experimental setup was excellent.
Yeah.
So also, I think we should talk more about, for example, which frequencies were played.
Okay, so
Because the problem explicitly asks about human voice spectrum and perhaps even about human voice.
yeah, sure. Okay, so for the smaller plots we had
Yes.
a constant frequency of 3,000 hertz, which,
Yes.
as we stated at the beginning, we believe is in the frequency of the human voice. And for the optimized horns that we created, we plotted the frequency response, therefore the intensity over different frequencies. As you could see here, this was a setup with a no horn, with no
Yes.
horn, so only the speaker. And we could see that the intensity for the lower frequencies, for the frequency range of human voice, was quite low.
Okay.
And
And
then, yeah, okay.
yes, and do you have? So, okay, can you go back to the previous slide?
Oh, yes, sure.
Yes. Okay, so this is not a human voice plate. You simply zoomed
No.
in on.
Okay, so this.
Or what is?
What this is that we get a sound that consists of.
Okay, so you have a
like
frequency
five-
suite,
yeah,
and then you
frequency
zoomed
suite.
in on the human voice spectrum, basically. Or
No, we
is
measured.
this a recorded human voice?
No, this is the frequency
Yes.
suite, and
Yes.
we measured the
Okay.
intensity of different frequencies.
Yes. So, for example, if you look at a human, if you looked at the human voice and how that looks with intensity versus frequency, how do you think that would change if you played an actual human voice into this?
Well, I'm not really sure I comprehend the question. Are you asking that how would the intensity of different frequencies change for the horn with comparing the horn with a no horn setup? Like if you said something with a horn and without a horn, how would the frequency intensity change?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So specifically, how would it affect a voice?
Okay.
Because, I mean, this is an approximation of a human voice. Since we're looking at the human voice, the
Yeah, sure. Okay.
that falls within there.
So-
But it's not actually a human voice.
Okay, but okay, cool. Okay, we can assume that a speaker without a horn would be as our console. Getting like a speaker without a horn would be as our console. What do you call it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A different point of view on that.
Yeah.
We plotted a graph of gain relative to frequency, and we would see that some frequencies would be picked up more by the horn than different. Therefore, that it would change the color of the sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as we talked about previously, that would be due to resonance phenomena.
That would be due to the phenomenon that it picks up different frequencies differently because the impedance match would depend on frequencies of the sound.
Yes. Okay, and for example, if the problem formulation asks us to vary the shape of the form.
Yeah, okay.
And if I'm correct, you looked at conical and exponential forms.
Yes.
How did these two differ?
Oh, they have
Okay.
yeah,
Oh,
same way,
Yeah.
different shapes.
Okay.
oh, I meant the
Same.
output.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for the discussion. Now I have a short summary from the opponent about the discussion.
Okay, so firstly, thank you for the interesting discussion. I thought it was very illuminating. So we started off by talking about acoustic impedance matching and specifically why acoustic impedance matching leads to more effective ambient transfer. We were able to connect that to the phenomena of standing waves, where some parts of the sound are reflected, thus creating a resonance phenomenon that results in different frequencies being amplified. I think that this is something that should have been more clearly incorporated in the presentation. I also think this is an important aspect that could have been looked at between different chords, different shapes and materials of chords. We also talked about sound collection and the difficulties that would arise if you place this farther, if you place the horn farther from some source. And we agreed that the use setup was good since no frequency could escape around it. We also talked about the amplification of different frequencies. And yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, opponent. Clarifying questions from the reviewer, please.
Okay, hello again. I have a first question about the Webster equation. So your equation is looking only for one direction, right?
Yes.
One direction, and do you think that there is no transfer of the sound to the y-axis, for example?
Okay, so
Yes or no? Did you investigate or no?
the development of sound in different
The
directions.
development of sound or the
Yeah, we measured the development of sound in different
Did
directions.
you theoretically or not? Please.
No.
Short answer. No, okay. Another question to your opponent. Well, in your speech, you said that the opponent, you said that the conclusion you should take from reporting was that the larger we have angle of the horn, the larger we have intensity. So, what do you think? If we have exactly horizontal shaped horns, would we have the same?
I'd like to jump in on that. That's not what I
This
stated.
is a question to you.
Okay, so I think this only holds up to a point, because we can see this, for example, if I hold my hand like this, then it's actually amplified, whereas if I hold it like this, then it's amplified. So,
this short answer, you said that the larger we have the inclination angle of the horn, the larger we have intensity. Is this right or not?
for the studied angles, this was a trend that we could see.
Is this right or not?
Yes, it's correct, because if you widen if you take the horn, then more frequencies can be amplified.
Okay, then. Well, so opponent talked about the standing waves inside the cylinder. So do you think, well, so first question is the opponent, do you think that standing wave could be occurred only in the cylindrical shape of the horns?
Yes, standing waves will appear in a cylindrical.
Yes, and it's not occurable in just horns?
Standing waves will also occur in horns.
Okay, thank you. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. But they would be yeah.
Investigate?
Not really we concentrated on the impedance of the sound and matching the impedance.
Okay, but do you think that it is a relevant parameter? Relevant?
Well, from message we've that we did at the end, we can assume that this was not such a high factor in the...
Such a high factor? Okay.
Yes.
Do you investigate the losing coefficients when, for example, sound hits the wall of the horn?
Whether we measured the
losing coefficient of
losing
the energy.
intensity of sound when hitting a wall?
Yes, when
No.
sound, no.
No.
What do you think about it? Was it relevant to investigate what energy loses in, for example, the viscosity in the air or heating the walls?
I think that depends a lot. Okay, so for example,
Is it relevant?
acoustic impedance varies very small degrees with temperature. And also, if you use a large room, then that will not be very high important factor.
Yes. What I mean here is that when we have a sound source over here, it transfers with spherically, but sometimes it hits the wall. This is what I mean. And did you investigate
The wall of the...
Oh, you mean the wall of the door?
Oh, no.
Yes.
Okay, we're out of time for the questions. Thank you for your questions. Now you have your preparation.
From Georgia, and today I'll be reviewer of problem number 7, Loud Voices. So this is a complete statement, and now, at first I will talk about the relevant, so the relevant parameters, I think, for this problem is the shape of it, material, and size of it. I mean, what is the height of it, and the x direction, size of the horn. Next, at first I'll talk about the general evaluation of each horn. First, an explanation of phenomenon, he talked about only acoustic dependent and electrical dependence. In theoretical model, he showed us only the Webster equation for the horn, and the Webster equation also is written only for one direction, as I said, as I mentioned in my 2 questions, and the experiments in comparison. He conducted experiments for different cone parameters, for different length, and different shapes of it. So, now I will talk about strengths of the recorder at first. So, at the beginning of his presentation, he showed and analyzed the human voice spectrum. At first, this is what I liked also, and then this is the point which also the reporter mentioned. Also compared different experiments, I mean acoustic output versus and the input parameters and relevant parameters, for example, the length of the horn, and also studied optimal horn and conducted experiments on in optimal horn. I mean, on different points of the horn, there was different inclination, and which I also like. But I think that there is of improvement like this, unclear impedance and unclear phenomenon explanation, because I think that the explanation of phenomena should include something different, because at first we have to talk about the collecting of the sound, which report also mentioned. Collecting sound means that the intensity should be the greatest on some area, and he didn't mention it. This is why I didn't like the explanation of phenomena. Also, no theoretical model for amplitude output, because we think that amplitude inside the horn and outside the horn would be different, because some energy transfers to the air from the horn, but some energy stays in the horn. And we have to, I think we have to investigate it. Also, it was difficult to draw the conclusion, because I really can't say what was the conclusion of his presentation. What is the, I mean, I saw what was the optimal size of the room, but I didn't see actually what was the reason of it. And also, I think that the loud voices mean that at first the biggest intensity in the air, and also how far does the air, how far do we hear the sound from the voice. Okay, now about the opponent. Okay, good clarifying questions about collecting of the sound, which is actually the problem statement. I think mentioning standing wave inside the presentation. I think this is one of the main presentation because standing wave means resonance, acoustic resonance, and it means that the intensity would be greater in these cylinders or tones. White noise also in presentation, which is I think not main part, but also good part of it. And introduced the standing waves for the phenomena, as I mentioned. Did not ask for explanation of phenomena. I mean, she said about collecting of the sound, but I didn't like prioritization of it because she talked about it later. No, discussion highlights geometrical quantities for curve of optimal horn, reflection of the sound, which also I talked about in the heating of the sound at the walls and the losing coefficient of the energy, and the dependence of intensity and independence of the frequency, because as we know, intensity is dependent on frequency. The questions were frequency versus intensity would vary for cylinder and core. Well, the reporter said that standing wave may occur, but would have a big effect.
Okay,
yes.
we're out of time, so let's thank the reviewer for the review. Including remarks.
Okay.
From the reporter, please.
So, okay, to the reviewer, you mentioned the lack of experiments. I think we create a suitable amount of experiments, creating polar plots of the intensity over angle, distance. We measured the intensity over distance development, and also we measured the intensity of different frequencies. You mentioned something about the intensity outside and inside the horn. I get where you were heading with this, but I don't think it's really viable to measure the intensity at distances that are smaller than the wavelength of the sound. That's why we measured the intensity of the angle of intensity of the intensity as 2 times the wavelength distance. To the theoretical model, you mentioned that a 1T model for this setup is not usable since it's really a 3-dimensional case, but I think that acoustic problems are hard enough to be addressed. Therefore, we assumed that this was a good approximation since it's very hard to model a 3D form. You mentioned something about the intensity over different angles of the depending on the angle of the horn. As you can see, we created sorry, not here, but we created a plot for different angles of the horn, and also to the question about a higher angle having better intensity over the overall loudness. I stated that this is not true. There is a optimal range for the angle of the horn. As you can see, that the higher angle creates a lot more interference, and the overall sound intensity is lower, as can be also seen as in when we plotted the sound power.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you, reporter. Questions from the jury, please. Hi, Elena, you were first. Okay, Eva.
Because I wonder.
Oh.
I have a question to the reporter. How would you find the acoustic impedance?
Okay, so the definition of acoustic impedance is not really easy in terms of imagining it, but it can be imagined as the...
No, I mean the physical definition of
like what's the equation for acoustic?
No, definition.
It's the opposition of the medium.
Physical.
Yeah, okay, so physical is the opposition of the...
Mathematical, say.
I don't really... A formula?
What is the acoustic?
A formula for acoustic impedance?
No.
The formula?
Mathematical formula, the definition.
like C divided by density of the times the density of the medium divided by surface.
Like something like this,
I'm not really sure where we're heading with this.
Well, I think the short answer is that he has difficulties to give a definition which would be immediately available, like immediately understandable. Is there?
because it's very important. What does it mean? The magic of the impedance.
I don't really comprehend the question. It's the opposition of the medium for the force to
I
apply.
have a question for that.
Okay, so the way you define constant impedance is pressure and volume flow. The
Yeah.
important part that you match densities of the mediums. That's I'm saying.
Okay. Sorry, we spent 2 minutes on that. Let's just switch to other questions.
Okay, so for the first for the opposition, you have the same for the reporter.
Yes.
So if you change the angle of the cone, is it the only thing that changes actually in the experimental setting?
Okay,
Is
so
it the only parameter that is actually changed?
okay, so as far as I
Yes,
know,
no.
when they
Or if yes, which one? And if no, okay.
okay, so when you change the angle and keep the length of the bar constant, then you change the length of the sides.
No, you change the surface at the end of the form.
Yeah, that
So
as well.
let's imagine this is like on the side. So if I change this and this was what you changed, really?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay, yeah. Then it's correct. Then it's the mouth radius.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Sorry.
The mouth radius.
The surface of the mouth.
Yeah.
Okay, Les.
So the reporter showed a big difference between materials, and I have a question to the opponent. What is this difference? Because
Okay, so I would say that one of the most important aspects of the material of the board is whether it's rigid. So I think if you change the rigidity of the board, then you change how that vibrates with the sound. And I think that's the reason why I see it.
okay,
Yeah,
I didn't review your answer, but okay. So
Oh,
what
yeah, answer? Okay. At first, I think that there will be two different situations because when we change material, at first we change resonance frequencies, and second, what I've been talking about, different material means different losses of the energy with the sound distribution system.
Okay, Elena.
Super quick question. Can you explain how do you call those?
Polar plots.
Yes. How do you explain this part, like two small blocks, or
At like 0 degrees and 180.
for example, so just above or below 180?
Yeah. Okay. No.
I couldn't see the slide. Yeah. So for
Yeah,
example,
okay,
just
so
go on the left.
Then when we were measuring the bound, that those ends were deleted, but we did not do this and that. It was the beginning of the measurement where we did not really
Left side.
left side,
Yes.
like
So as I understood,
or the interference patterns.
so those two are interference.
Yes.
That's what you say.
The spikes in the
Just like two flaps, interference.
it interferes at the back. Therefore, there are dips in intensity.
Okay. We have time for one last question. One last short question. Well, apparently there are no further questions, so let's thank the jury for the questions and the team for the answers. For the report. The grades for the report are as follows. They are 7, 5, 5, 5, and 5. Next, we have the grades for the opposition, which are as follows. 8, 8, 7, 8, and 8. And finally, we have the grades for the review, which are as follows. 8, 7, 8, 7, and 7. Let's thank the jurors. We'll comment on them, but we'll try to be quick because we need to have time for the lunch, which is important. As for the report, we had a lot of grades of 5 and one single highest grade of 7. Would anyone with grade of 5 like to give a brief comment on the grade? Probably not. Okay. I think that most jurors agreed that your report was and your solution of the problem was good and interesting, but still there were quite many questions about your analysis and your theory and your experiments that were in particular raised by the opponent. Yes, and the impedance, obviously impedance as well. And therefore other jurors could not go higher than 5 points. But still, I personally, I appreciated the amount of results that you have obtained and the depth of your analysis and also the clear conclusions that you presented in your report. Therefore, I particularly ended with a little higher grade of 7 with your report. I liked it. I very much agree with critical remarks about your shortcomings with your solution that obviously exist, but still my grade was higher than other grades. As for the opposition, we had a lot of grades of 8, but one lowest grade of 7, which was still a very high grade for the opposition. So, Phil, could you just say a couple of words about the opposition?
Oh, good opposition. Got bogged down a little bit there. Perhaps should have asked about some of the graphs presented, which clearly showed standing wave phenomenon on them. And I would have liked to have seen ask more questions about these. Where do these originate from? What are they? Are they important? How do they contribute? Good work there.
So in the report there were a lot of things to discuss, and I think you've taken your opportunity and really discussed all of these things very clearly. You've articulated your opinions very clearly, and if the questions were relevant, that's why I think you had a very good opposition. It was not ideal, obviously, that's why the grades are not 10, but still it was very, very good. As for the review, we had a mix of 7s and 8s. Probably someone would like a brief comment about the review. Yes, Lars?
Well, I gave a 7. But I actually liked your review and the point you brought up. I would have liked to give you an 8, but in the end, you didn't like the standard part of the review was not in the shape you live in. You didn't have the right time management and the right weights on reporter, opponent, and discussion. Apart from that, I very much liked it.
Okay. Well, my grade was 8. I think that you also had a very good opportunity to discuss a lot of physics and a lot of various aspects in the discussion and in the report and in the opposition. And I think that you were good in addressing all these topics. You explained your opinions clearly, and I think this was a good review.
And the areas for improvement.
Say again?
Said more about the areas of improvement.
That's also an important thing. Yeah. Okay, if there are no further questions, then thank you very much for being with us. Enjoy your lunch and good luck for the